Welcome to another CO2 Monday and the Refrigeration Mentor podcast. I'm your host, Trevor Matthews. I want to thank everyone for taking the time once again to have a listen to the podcast, check out the YouTube videos. We really appreciate it here. This is how other people find out about it. Please share it when you can, post it if you like the content. What we're trying to do is really share some knowledge, maybe get a passion going again for people in the refrigeration industry because we're really excited about it. I love it. I love sharing the knowledge, and I love all the guests that come on the show. Today, we have a legend here, good friend that I've met a few times over the last couple months, starting to get to know one another and just really learning about the amount of knowledge my friend has here.
Jim McClendon.
How you doing, brother?
Good, good. How you doing, Trevor? Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate you taking the time and just getting to know you over the last few weeks, last couple months is very inspiring, even to me, that the opportunity in refrigeration that is out there, and just learning about. And you work for one of the biggest organization in the world, but just there is just so much involved in just your company. It's crazy, and you've been involved with CO2 for many years. But let's start off with really tell us about yourself and a bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. I came into like the engineering side of the trade, kind of the long course, if you will. I started in the trades, construction, became a pipe fitter. From pipe fitter, went into service, and just continually, went to school at night, found every class I could. Back in the dark age, we were limited to supply houses and so forth. But most of that career was in Southern California. So in the LA area, fortunately, there's representation by most of the manufacturers. They were always having training and so forth. So just couldn't get enough, kept going, kept chipping away at the different classes, and then working towards, I got a couple technical degrees for refrigeration, electronics, and so forth. And just kept chipping away at academic career. And then finally, it took me to I was 42 years old before I actually got my engineering degree in mechanical engineering. So,
Wow, I love that. I love that because the learning never stops, Jim. And then
oh yeah,
you prove it. 42, 43, and you get your engineering degree at that time. And that's what's amazing about this industry. The learning will never stop. Never stop. So at 42, 43, you get your electrical engineering degree. Congratulations, by the way.
thank you, thank
You
you.
don't look that much older than that. So anybody who's listening on the podcast.
Yeah, that was just last year, right? I wish. Yeah, so I just kept working at it, and that opened up new opportunities. And I had been in the broader mechanical industry. I'd call it applied thermal sciences. I started in refrigeration and then shifted into HVAC, and then went into nuclear power for a while. And then I did data centers, so a couple critical path application areas, which was just really interesting. Kept expanding. Ended up opening my own company. I was a mechanical contractor, and then that was in California. And then when I moved to the Midwest, I spun up a design build firm and ran that mechanical construction design build. We had a plan and spec engineering group. And then when I sold that, that's when I started my journey with Walmart.
Well, there's a huge amount of stories in all of that story. Like I could just imagine, because you started out the beginning not knowing anything about refrigeration, and then getting into construction and service, and then over the time just continue to plug away. I love that story. And then you own your own business, you sell it off, and then a new journey, another career starts.
Yeah, it was just timing really. But when I sold my company, I was kind of in a non-compete position, and Walmart was looking for a new engineer to start their sustainability journey. And so I entered Walmart about the 2004 timeframe. We kind of kicked off sustainability journey with just looking at things differently, system design from refrigeration, HVAC, lighting, the whole nine yards. And so that's been quite interesting. That led to a lot of opportunities for us to do new technology exploration, demonstration, pilot. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. Some made their way into prototype. Some we pulled a lot of learnings out of them. And then next time we, apply those learnings and do it a little bit different. So yeah, it's been quite interesting on that side.
Yeah, because when we chatted, because I will get into some of this, but when we chatted, you're the type of engineer that you're hands on. You're in the field. You want to see how stuff is working. And over the years, that's how you learn a lot. And this is what I talk to about a lot of technicians. You want to start learning the engineering side because that helps dramatically on your troubleshooting and the technical side of it. And what's really cool about some of the stories we talked about before is that you would go out there with the team, with the field support team, and just go and work and learn together and find out either something what worked and what didn't work. Tell us a little bit about how that went for you and why would you do something like that? Why were you in the field so much? Is it a passion or?
Yeah, well, both passion, it's just my service roots, couldn't get rid of them. The guys I'd work with, the service teams, construction teams, they always dreaded when I was coming to the job because it's, oh no, this guy's going to get his hands into everything and mess it up. But I think you hit the nail on the head to really understand what's going to work, what the impact of your decisions are. You need to get out in the field, you need to experience it, you need to see firsthand the consequences, and then really listen to the people side by side with them, listen to them, get that feedback, and incorporate that going forward. Don't just listen and acknowledge, but listen and incorporate that going forward.
Yeah, and that's what some of the things that we talked about is that how it's so important when you're working with someone that you want to help them be very successful at what they're doing. At the end of the day, a lot of times they're coming to work for you and do work for you, but you want them, when we were talking, you want them to be very successful in what they're doing. And I think this is really important when you're having a partnership and you're working with others is to make sure that you work together on things like that.
Yeah, when I had my engineering company, we would hire young engineers out of school and made it a requirement that they would ride in the truck with either the fitters or the service guys for 3 months. And so it was great to give them, really onboard them onto what the impact of our decisions are. But it was also kind of a litmus test. If they didn't like riding around in the truck, or they felt that, I want to be an engineer, I don't want to have to go to a construction site and so forth. Well, that was kind of a good litmus test for, you're probably not a good fit for this company. And we had several that worked both ways, but the ones that went through it, they came out of it with not only just an understanding, but a respect and an appreciation for the work we were doing, which I had a high regard for that.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, especially now. Like I hear a lot of times that there's not enough people coming in the industry, and which may be true. We don't have enough passion in there. People just don't want to work. I hear this all the time, but from what I'm seeing, the more people that I talk to, new people getting in the industry, when I'm on Instagram or when I'm on LinkedIn, these new people, they want to learn, they want to work. There's lots of people out there. We just got to find more of them, which is exciting because there's a lot of different sides to refrigeration. Maybe being on the tools, working overnight, working on call is not for you because it is not for everyone, right? At 2 o'clock in the morning, getting a call. I remember doing it lots. It's not for everyone. But how do we fire our passion inside someone who might love refrigeration? Maybe it's the consulting side. Maybe it is design side. Maybe it's the engineering side. Maybe it's the sales side or project manager side, because there is so much. And you see all of this, which is really cool because you work with a lot of different parties.
Yeah, it is so broad. I mean, exactly. You can really stay very tight in the trade piece of it using the tools, which is great. I find that exciting. But you can take it in many, many directions. You can go obviously into controls, you can go into coding, you can go into IT, connectivity, that whole world. You can follow the path. I mean, it offers career paths. I wouldn't recommend taking the long course I took, but it can give you a path into an engineering career if that's where you want to go. Manufacturer side, end user side, contractor side. It's really wide.
Yeah. And that's what's so great about it. And that's what I love about it because there's so much opportunity. And a lot of people don't know about that. Like a lot of people I talk to and like technicians that I've talked to that planning or thinking on getting out of the industry, they just don't know the opportunity that's at hand and that the potential is there because it's just not in their circles a lot of the time. But if you start to explore and you start to look for it a bit more, you'll find it out there. You'll find it out there.
Yeah. It's the old adage, way leads the way.
Yeah, I love it. So you started with Walmart back in 2004, got a ton of refrigeration experience, worked on the tools, did engineering. 2004, things started to move along. You start to learn, I'm sure, the way working for retailer goes that installs and service and has all this new type of technology at the forefront, right? Because you would be in the position of like, I'm sure people coming from all angles, from manufacturers to consultants to engineers, want to work with you, right? And show their new designs and prototypes and everything that they have. So all the way back then, because I know here in Canada, I think CO2 really just started to hit around the late 90s, early 2000 here in Quebec. And so you're saying 2004, when was the first time you started to hear and start to see about CO2 in refrigeration?
Probably about the same line. When I came to Walmart, as I said, we started the CO2 the sustainability investigation. We kicked that off with a couple of stores we called experimental stores. One was in the Denver area, one was in the Dallas, Fort Worth area. And those were board initiatives. And so the board really came to us and said, we want you to really reach outside the box. In fact, they said, if you don't have failures, you didn't try hard enough,
I like that.
which was really an incredible license and also an incredible pressure at the same
Yeah.
time.
Oh, for
Still had to
sure.
be an operating store. But through that process, we didn't include CO2 in those two stores. We considered it, but there were so many other tests and experiments in those stores, from systems to materials to lighting and so forth, that we put it on the shelf and waited for our next like demonstration project, which shifted from Walmart to Sam's Club. I think Walmart may have been, at least I've been told, we were the first retailer to do secondary CO2 in the US. I'm not sure. That's what I've been told. But anyway, that was a Sam's Club in outside near Savannah, Georgia, Sandfly, Georgia. And what's interesting is the president of Sam's Club at the time, Doug McMillan, is our current CEO of Walmart.
Wow.
And I remember working with Doug on that project, and we walked through there, and he gave us the same challenge. You know, we're all done. We opened the store up and walking the president through, trying to show him all the great stuff. And he goes, no, show me what didn't work. And immediately he wanted to go right to where we thought our biggest vulnerability was, or failure or risk or what have you. So that's where you're going to learn. So we've really had a good atmosphere to test and push the boundaries in Walmart. Very supportive in that type of environment. And they want to do that because let's vet through, let's test in demonstration and small pilot before we pull the trigger on something that's going to give a wide scale exposure across the portfolio. So that was pretty interesting. So that was probably 2005, maybe 2006. We opened the first one, and then we followed suit with a couple more that were more in demonstration caliber, and then turned it into proto probably within a couple of years after that, if I recall. And so the CO2 was proto for a few years, 2 or 3 years, maybe a couple of years.
So did you have before that, were you using any secondary fluid systems at that point, like brine or glycol before CO2?
Yeah, we had experimented, tested with some glycol prior to that. The experimental stores I mentioned, we applied secondary glycol in those stores. Put your toe in first, and then then we go in a little deeper on the next one. And those worked. The core systems worked fine, worked great. We had some opportunities, like with everything new. First one up the adoption curve, you're gonna stub your toe a little bit. But we learned from those and continue to improve upon those.
Yeah, no, and that's fantastic. So especially when you come in with new technology and new systems, it's not only getting the system right and getting it working, but you still have to have people that can install it, service, and maintain it. How was that back in the mid 2000s when you were coming out with these experimental designs and systems?
That's always been a challenge. I think industry-wide, we find it now still, but that was part of the difficulty in trying to scale that up is I would say technology is the easy piece. Just apply engineering means and methods and best practices, and you can, you'll figure out the technology piece. Change management is always harder. And those were the biggest burdens in trying to scale out new technology is getting the training in place, getting it awareness and getting the contractors and service folks, just comfortable, just comfortable with it. New is always challenging.
Yeah. And I agree with that because there is a lot to learn from it. And there's a lot, not only for the contractor side, but the service maintenance side, all of it. And it is a process to learn all this stuff because it is new. So you did that 2005, 2006 to get your first secondary CO2 system. And then from there, what was the next steps? What was that? Because that was early on for CO2.
Yeah, so we moved it into prototype and so that was the new build program for a couple of years. It's back to the adoption curve, early adopters, and then you're trying to work your way to late adopters, and that's where the cost curve starts to level out. I think we were probably a little too early. We never could get over that hump. Problems just continued to emerge. We had a shift in the format, and ultimately we stopped doing the CO2 systems probably in the 2000s and went to a distributed pack type system that incorporated conventional HFC refrigerants from there. And so now I look back and I go, wow, if we'd have just kept on going with the CO2 at that point, and we'd be so much farther down the road right now from our total carbon footprint.
Yeah, that's all about the learning journey, right?
Right.
You always can look back and say, oh, we did this and that, but that's okay. We're where we're at now, and we got a good future ahead of us for sure. There's lots of learning and there's going to be lots of challenges. So then you stopped it for a little bit. Then what was next? Because I really believe, because you guys are still at the forefront of all this stuff, because you guys are one of the first ones that'll test some of this stuff here in North America before anyone else, because you probably have an opportunity to test it because people are coming with you new technologies all the time, and you have to probably pick and choose what to try because you can't try everything all at once, right?
Right. Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, again, I'll emphasize that the company has always been very supportive on testing technology and demonstrating. And that's great because of the impact. It's a big footprint. So we recognize little improvements here, little improvements there. Once you go to cross scale, really adds up to a significant value prop. So yeah, we've CO2 unfortunately didn't take off at the time, but it's always been on the board, if you will, looking for additional drivers of change, which over the last couple, 3 years, as you've talked about quite a bit, we've seen significant numbers of drivers of change kind of converge, come into alignment. And so that's helped bring that back to surface. Obviously back in the position of testing new systems now. We're really exploring the landscape going forward on low carbon solutions. What's different now than at that time is our entire program was very focused towards new construction. I mean, we were building stores, and some of the years, 300 stores a year. Really a large growth.
One a day almost in a year. Like, oh man.
Almost, yeah, more than one a day if you don't count weekends.
Yeah, definitely.
Massive program. Now the program is actually bigger, but it's all existing footprint. So many things have changed. The challenges are actually exponentially higher. Trying to work within an existing store, an operating store. How do you go in and really impact not just refrigeration, but HVAC systems, fossil fuels, lighting, anything, and minimize that store disruption piece. So that's our challenge now. And so from a technology path, unfortunately, it's not like the choice of, well, I'm going to pick this technology and go with it. It's driven more so by the site adapter, the constraints at one store from another. And they could be anything from structural constraints to real estate constraints, space constraints, rooftop competition. We have other initiatives in the company and a lot of effort around utilizing that rooftop for renewable energy. We have electrified last mile delivery fleet being implemented. So there's competition for real estate around the building. Put all those factors together and now it changes the equation. And what we feel is we're going to need every technology and every means of application of that technology, in our quiver in order to really address the portfolio and get into a low GWP impact, low carbon solution.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people probably don't think about. You're just installing equipment, servicing, designing equipment. You don't think, well, I didn't, I wouldn't think, oh, well, we only have this much space on the roof for this specific piece of equipment. You can't just throw anything on there, even though you could take any technology, but for that specific site and that specific state or wherever it's at, it just doesn't allow it. So this is where I think maybe that matrix or the complexity of your roles and your team's role is going to be over the next few years is trying to figure out those best case scenarios for that specific site.
Yeah, navigating through those electrical infrastructure is also a big one, and the impact on the grid in our area. As we electrify the stores, you shift the refrigeration over. Are we looking at new service upgrades and looking at switch gear? How does that impact? So it becomes a much more complex equation than a new store, which almost a white sheet of canvas. Those were easier to imagine and innovate on new solutions, especially from a holistic integration solution, trying to integrate existing systems that have different timelines for refresh, may have to deploy different types of technology, but holistically they have to integrate, they have to work together to reach the solution or the outcome you're looking for. Yeah, raise the bar.
Yeah, well, you got a big challenge ahead of you, and I love it. I love it. I'm excited for you. So you did the secondary CO2 systems, and they slowed down for a while. And then when did you start to see transcritical CO2?
We've been tracking it for a few years now. It's in the industry, as you well know. It's been resurfacing over time, and of course, we're an international organization, so I lean heavily on my partners in Europe. I have partners in South Africa and partners in China, and so I work with them quite a bit. While we weren't quite there in developing and ready to deploy our CO2 solutions more recently, I work with our UK group. And so I've been tracking and working with them for the last several years. And in fact, I talk with them probably a couple times a month at least, just regularly keeping up and so forth. And so we were able to really stay in step, if you will, with how it's developing, the ebb and flow and so forth. And at the same time, our new construction program started to fall back, as it did across a lot of retail. The emphasis was more on existing footprint, not so much on expansion and growth. So most of the real estate capital was going back into existing systems, not so much in new builds. So our opportunity for deploying those new systems started to diminish. So we had to how do we do this on an existing footprint? It's a little bit different. And then wait till we get an opportunity for a new store, which we did. And we were finally ready to kind of re-enter the construction market again on growth. And the first thing we did was implement, transcritical CO2 system on that site.
And so I'm assuming you've been to some transcritical CO2 stores before. You worked on tons of refrigeration systems. What was your thoughts when you seen these higher pressures or learning about transcritical CO2?
Yeah, again, being able to work with our European and South African partners, they're a bit ahead of us, right? They've had a little bit more time to deal with it and so forth. So I can see the trend that they were taking, and as far as just raising the overall system pressure ratings to accommodate the higher pressures. Higher pressures in general were not concerning. The only concerning point is to ensure that we keep the refrigerant in the system.
Yeah.
And watching Europe go to 60 and then even in the 80 bar, we're seeing the trend and what's going to be necessary. And so we knew as we entered in the US, we're entering it at one point, but ultimately we have to get to the other point. And it'll be a path. I'm not concerned with higher pressures. I'm only concerned with the resiliency factor of keeping refrigerant in the system.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that's any system. I think any system that we put out or anyone installs, we need to keep that stuff, that refrigerant in the system, because all of it is not good for our environment. Like I talk to people like, oh, well, I just release CO2 to the atmosphere. It's okay. Well, it's not okay. It's still one GWP. And I just let people know that like at some point, there's going to be regulations on CO2 as well. You're not going to be able to just release it. At some point, there will be some sort of recovery machine or whatever it is. And then you're doing a disservice to yourself because you got to put that back in somehow. And it takes time to do that stuff.
Well, yeah, and that is absolutely all true. I think the more immediate driver is just the business solution. It's not sustainable for the business to be interrupted that way. As we've learned, it has cascade effects on supply chain, on cylinders, containers, and so forth and so on. So, I mean, fundamentally, back to root cause, keep the refrigerant in the system.
Yeah, and I think that's a goal for a lot of people, not even end users like yourself and retailers, but I think even all the contractors that I talk to, technicians, they want the gas to release because it's a lot of work. When you lose a whole
Yeah.
charge off a rack, it's a lot of work. It's not like you gotta there's some planning, like you say, supply chain issues, gotta get to the distributor or wholesaler, make sure they have it if you don't have it at your shop. It's a big job to do that can potentially be mitigated in certain ways. Uh,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally agree.
So you got some transcritical CO2 systems out there. What are your thoughts compared? Because you've seen the first, and you evolved because you've seen the first CO2 system that came out. There wasn't really a lot of products like there are today. There wasn't as much controls, wasn't as much valves. Now we've come 15, almost 20 years since maybe you started to see it. Not 20 years yet, but almost. What is the evolution you have seen and some of the big changes that you've seen over the last 15 to 20 years for CO2?
Definitely in controllability. We certainly had those early systems had opportunities, on the control piece, in the component selection, some of it, the sourcing requirements for some of those components, pumps and so forth, were problematic. So, as we've gone through that experience, that we've found more resilient solutions, more robust devices, comprehensive controls. And I don't think any of that's not unusual to other technologies. They constantly are in or striving to evolve. I think what's interesting now, and just in the last few years, and is going to be particularly interesting in the next few years, is the increased focus on refrigeration broadly, but CO2 specifically, and other low GWP solutions because of all the drivers of change, because of social awareness, because of corporate objectives, because of state and federal regulation. The interest, the activity, and the resources going into exploration, research, and development of refrigerant solutions is really higher than I think I've ever seen it. So that's exciting. We're going to see a lot of technology advances over the next short time, and it'll just be exciting to see what those are.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this, like very excited because we haven't seen so much change in this industry since it started, I believe, because it seemed to me like when I look back and I kind of do some studying on the evolution of refrigeration, there was quite a few years that, yeah, there's some technology that came, but nothing really stuck. Then we just kept going along, and then about the last 5, 7 years, things started to roll. Because I've even seen when I worked at Emerson, I seen technology that came out and it was way ahead of its time. Like some electronics they were doing like back in the mid 2000s. I'm like, 10 years later, after I've been working in the field and I see this, I'm like, how didn't I see this 10 years ago? It was already out. So it's kind of ahead of
Yeah.
its time. But I really believe there's things now that, like you said, driving factors, regulations, things are just going to continue to evolve, which I'm super excited about because exciting to see because we're going to see a shift in the way we do refrigeration, the way we service stuff, the way we install stuff, the way we maintenance things. And we got social media now that I really believe helps a lot of other people out to get an understanding. We never had an opportunity. I never had an opportunity. We were talking about this earlier, where we could listen to some people like us chat about refrigeration and get a little tip here and there to really grow your knowledge base. Where do you see training and education for the refrigeration industry over the next 5 to 10 years with all these technical advancements?
Oh, wow. I mean, as you've said, we've got to lean in heavily to the training piece, recruiting people, bringing new folks into the trade, retention, and then training at all levels, basic training, finding techs at all levels and, working fast to advance them. And so I think to fill that gap in between, we really got to lean into technology. And technology can both help fill the gap in the interim and be a fantastic tool to aid in that training. The technology is there. It's in other industries. We tend to be siloed, at least historically, as in other areas of specialty or other arenas of thermal sciences. But we really got to look across the industries and understand what's available here, what's available there from a diagnostic standpoint, from a technology standpoint, in order to help us fill the gaps now and then become teaching aids and learning aids as we go forward to expand the knowledge of those that are in the trade to those that are coming into the trade and developing through the trades.
Could you give an example of something from a different industry that would be good to take into refrigeration industry to really help that, if you have one?
I'm always looking across other industries. Before coming to Walmart, as I said, I've had the fortune to be in a few different industries, from industrial process to nuclear power and data processing and so forth. So I'm always looking out on, well, man, they do that in data centers, do that all the time. Why can't we do that in this industry? One example I'll give you, it's not really related to me, it's interesting, but I did an initiative a few years ago where I was trying to develop and apply an economizer system for refrigeration using thermosiphon. And so basically, cold climates, fundamentally, you just connect the pipe from the suction header to the condenser. And when it's cold enough, you turn the compressors off, open the valve, and spin the fans, and the condensers do what they always do. They condense vapor into a liquid. That thermosiphon action created a volume sweep for the mass, and then I added a small liquid pump and created a pressure differential for liquid. When you're dealing with 20-degree liquid, you don't need a big pressure differential, right? And so we developed that. I applied it to several stores, and still has a long way to go for advancement and optimizing. But we've had sites where we've gone 2 days and the compressors never ran, and we've held cases. That idea to me came from, I was just exploring other industries, and I was looking at, of all things, the Hadron Super Collider, and looking at, well, how do they cool that thing? It's like 7,500 meters down. It's 16-mile circumference, big loop in the ground. Yeah, it's particle accelerator with these huge magnets. And investigated, all the cooling apparatus is thermosiphon based, which makes sense because the last thing you want 100 meters underground is moving parts. And so I thought about that and talked to some folks. We work with NREL quite a bit. And so I talked with those folks a lot, and we were kind of kicking the idea around, and they said, yeah, we're going to apply that to our new supercomputer cooling system. And so we went through that design, and ultimately all that came out to, like this economizer system for refrigeration, which may go absolutely nowhere. But the point was, look outside the industry, look across, look at other things you can be doing. It may or may not make sense. But I think that's how we'll have to continually push and expand the industry going forward.
Yeah, I love that. Thinking outside the box and coming up with things and ideas from other industries. That's amazing. And I'm happy to hear, because I didn't even know that anyone has done something like that. I've heard of thermosiphon in the industrial industry a bit because they use it there, but I've not heard of it on an actual commercial refrigeration system in the sense that you said. So that's super cool. Very innovative, Jim.
Yeah, obviously it's got to be in cold climate. So
Yeah, well, it works out great here in the middle of winter, that's for sure.
yeah, it's good. I've talked to our folks in Canada about that, so they're interested.
Okay, so this is amazing. Learning so much. So in CO2 secondary, been doing some CO2 transcritical. What's some of the things that you would like to see from different organizations out there, and you might have just mentioned this, from like training organizations, contractors, consultants, and even your internal organization? How do we work together to help this refrigeration industry evolve?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think everybody's asking that right now, right? I think, we have to start in the beginning, which is attract people. And the technology is advancing. We just talked about it. There's so many career paths in refrigeration. and many of the trades because they're advancing technologically. So it's really cool. Ideally, we get to the point where, or we have been and need to continue working with counselors, high school counselors, junior college counselors, just educating, making young people aware of the opportunity. And I mean, wouldn't it be great if you got to a point where the trade was so highly recognized and demanded that kids were taking special classes in high school to qualify to get into the refrigeration trade, as opposed to I'm studying to take the MCAT or the DAT. I'm really studying to take the entry exam to the refrigeration industry. Trying to create that that atmosphere around it, and it's there. The technology just continues to advance.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I keep working with a lot of different schools and associations with that, and I had there was a post on LinkedIn that I was talking with a few people about. I really believe we got to figure out how we can get refrigeration known to more of the public. How do we get out there? Because I didn't have a clue what refrigeration was. I fell into it by accident. Long story. Same with me. There was a lot of road bumps along the way. Didn't have an opportunity like today where you can learn this industry way faster than I learned it. Way faster than I learned it. And the opportunities there. I really like that. And I think we all got to work together a bit more. There's a lot of competition out there, and there's a lot of difference of opinion, but we need to come together as an industry, I believe, and work this together so we can get more people to come into this industry. Everyone does have to make money for what they do. They bring value. You pay for someone who brings value. But I think the biggest challenge that we're going to have is a few things, like you said, is getting more people interested in this industry, because there's a lot of fun things out there in there. But to me, I love refrigeration. I love talking about it. I love being involved in it because it's fun. I get to meet people like you and a lot of the great participants that are on the call today, just to learn how the evolution is going with it. Because you told me 2 or 3 stories tonight that are new to me, and I'm like, wow, that's very interesting. I want to learn more about it because it excites me. And I think this is the next generation with the new technologies, with CO2, that it's going to be very exciting. And if we work together, I believe that we're going to be able to grow the industry together.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, drivers of change are helping us, I believe, in that we're now looking at new low carbon solutions, new, low GWP solutions. But we've had other refrigerant changes through the industry for different drivers, different reasons. But in the past, I can't recall ever seeing a social presence or seeing people talk about, oh yeah, did you hear we're leaving R22 and we're going to 404? Or, hey, 448 is the new refrigerant. Now I see just across society, social media, I mean, people I talk to talking about CO2. Oh, I've heard of this CO2 refrigeration. So I think the driver of change can also be our driver of industry influence as well. There's obviously a high awareness across society and the groups from young people to millennials and so forth around the environment, around low carbon solutions. And this, this fits right in there. So it's a catalyst for really helping us expand the industry, bring awareness to, hey, this is the next neat technology. If you're a young person, you want to get into something cool that's the future, look at this.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. If we can use it even as a stepping stone to intrigue people, be like, wow, I didn't know there was this much controls in it. I didn't know I could use my phone and I can diagnose something, or I can fix a system using my phone, or I can communicate with a system that's really telling me what's going on, and I'm learning and it's learning, and we're solving problems together. And I think that's what's really cool about the new technology. And I really try to talk to people about the different things in refrigeration. It's not like you just go and you put some gauges on that. No, we get into some complex stuff. I can't imagine some of the stuff that you had to deal with some of these new technologies that have barely been out there. You might have been the first one to do it, and you have been on a lot. And just seeing those results, and now you can take technology and look at it. This is one thing I love about CO2 is that there's so many pressure and temperature transducers, there's so much information, so much data, that for me as a technician and a professional, I can be like, oh, this is interesting now. You see, when this starts to ramp up, this compressor ramps up, the valves start to close off a bit. What's that really doing to the system? Now it can make me think a little bit differently than me running over to a set of gauge. What's the pressure here? Run over to some temperature probe. What's the pressure here? And it's making me really be more curious about refrigeration than ever before, just because I can read a lot more data, and I can start now to think a little bit differently about refrigeration.
And shift that requirement into an asset. When we wanted to expand telemetry and legacy systems, it was a force, right? We had to go add additional telemetry that didn't necessarily impact or support the basic function. So it's a little bit more challenging. But now, well, these are requirements. So let's take that requirement, turn it into an asset from a telemetry standpoint, and then really build the analytics around that. Yeah, I agree. You can do so much more with that.
Jim, what advice would you give to someone who is just entering the refrigeration industry, or somebody who has even been in for a little bit? Do you have any advice for them for CO2 or the industry in general?
Yeah, it's funny. All those age-old adages you hear, in time, you learn to experience them. It's like never say never, and you don't know what you don't know, and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, those are very rudimentary and fundamental, but it is so true. You learn every day. Just never stop trying to learn. Always keep your mind open. Challenge yourself. Small steps. Just continually challenge yourself, and never think you know it all. As soon as you think you know it all, first thing will happen is you'll be proven wrong.
Yeah, I love those words. I love those words. Jim, how can people get a hold of you, get a hold of your organization if they want to learn more about you or what you do?
Sure, absolutely. Of course, Walmart.com, you can go to that, and there's a sustainability page, there's a zero emissions goal page on that, so you can learn about the company's initiatives around renewable energy and fleet electrification, reduction of fossil fuels, and so forth. Contact me on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me through email, james.mcclendon@walmart.com. Love to talk with folks, love to hear what everybody else is doing. And yeah, just really appreciate you and what you're doing, Trevor, to advance this industry. The resource that you provide, man, if I'd have had that, coming through, I wouldn't have all this gray hair. I wouldn't have as much gray hair. I'd still have some.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate those kind words. And I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. I know you're extremely busy man. I want to thank everybody who joined us today, listen on the podcast or YouTube. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for all of you. And I really appreciate everyone who supports Refrigeration Mentor. Please share this if you enjoyed this. This was a great conversation. I've learned a lot from you, Jim. And hopefully we'll do this again. I'd love to do this again.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone, and have a fantastic afternoon. Hey, thank you for watching this video. I do hope it is bringing you a lot of value. If you are looking to grow and build your refrigeration teams and want them to learn CO2 refrigeration, head to the refrigerationmentor.com website, click to contact us, and let us know how we can build a culture around training inside your organization. Let's get a conversation going.